right. It was the language of dreams and goals. But there was a price. As my siblings and I distanced ourselves from the Czech language, a space widened between us and our parents, especially my father, whose English sat on him like a poorly tailored suit. It was as if my parents' life in their home country, and the values that defined that life, didn't translate credibly into another language. It was much easier to rebel against them in English. Even the English names for our parents encouraged dissent. The tender Czech words we'd used, maminka, tatinek, are impossible to pronounce with contempt, but they have no corresponding forms. In English, the sweet but childish mommy and daddy are soon abandoned for mom and dad, words that, we discovered, lend themselves perfectly well to adolescent snark. I've wondered, recently, whether things might have been different for my father had his children remained rooted in their native tongue. Over time, we spoke together less and less. I remember watching him grow frustrated at his powerlessness to pass on to his children the legacies he most longed to leave: an ardent religiosity, the nurturing of family ties, pleasure in the music and traditions of his region, which I'm now ashamed to say we often mocked, and a tender respect for ancestors. All of these became diluted by the steady flow of our new experiences, narrated in English, laced with Anglophone aspiration and individualism. As we entered adulthood and dispersed all over North America into our self-reliant lives, my father gave up. He moved back home. For the next 2 decades, I lived my adult life, fully absorbed into the English-speaking universe, even adding American citizenship to my Canadian one. My dad was the only person with whom I regularly spoke Czech, if phone calls every few months could be described as regularly, and if my clumsy sentences, patched together with abundant English, could be called speaking Czech. My Czech heritage began to feel more and more like a vestigial organ. But loss inevitably clarifies that which is gone. When my father died, and with him my connection to Czech, it was as if the viola section in the orchestra had fallen silent. Not carrying the melody, it had gone unnoticed, but its absence announced how much depth and texture it had supplied, how its rhythms had lent coherence to the music. In grieving my father, I became aware of how much I also mourned the silencing of Czech in my life. There was a part of me, I realized, that only Czech could speak to, a way of being that was hard to settle into, even with my own siblings and mother, when we spoke in English. I suddenly felt unmoored, not only from my childhood, but from the entire culture that had shaped me. I have been thinking about that loss ever since, becoming intimate with its outline and its various shadings. And I have been thinking about language my whole life, often all day and every day, since I first wandered into a linguistics class as a fresh university student. In my subsequent work as a researcher in psycholinguistics, a field that is preoccupied with the psychological aspects of language, I have puzzled through the minute details of how we learn and use language. But little about my studies prepared me for the inexplicable void I felt in connection with a language I rarely spoke anymore. This book is my attempt to make sense of that loss, to honor it and give it a home within the framework of my academic knowledge of language. A semblance of coherence began to emerge once I peered through a number of different windows, considering not just my own experiences, but those of others. I've tried to relate these experiences to the work of researchers who study language and migration in its many facets, including the ways in which languages ebb and flow within an individual's mind, and the ways in which they are buffeted about in the world by the winds of societal change. Languages are living things, and as with all things that are alive,